Hello, everybody. This is my first solo podcast, and I wanted to use this opportunity to speak about mental health, anxiety, depression, and the way that it shapes my life or my experience of it. Because I think it's very useful to bring these things out into the open, to make them an available discussion rather than simply, a discussion between private parties that don't share anything outside of the circle of trust. I really want to make the discussion open so that you can get a little bit of what I'm going through, but also just to hear that some of the experiences might be the same and might be different. And that's what I want to offer with this podcast, and perhaps a few more in the future if people find these useful. So I'll begin with my experience of depression and self-harm in high school. That was probably the first time I noticed that I had tendencies toward anxiety and darker thoughts, darker feelings. And I think it was around grade 9, end of grade 9, start of grade 10, that I started to feel a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety about who I was and where I was going with my life. And I wouldn't call it an identity crisis as such, but I definitely went to extreme lengths to try and find out who I could be. And to the point that, and this is quite ridiculous to me now, but to the point that I even once defined myself as a pseudo-Satanist, and goth or emo, whatever was the completely anti-cultural, anti-mainstream, fuck society type of identity. I just did not want to be what everyone else wanted me to be. And that might be quite a natural and normal thing for teenagers to do, but I really didn't feel a positive sense of self at that age. And it was very difficult. I mean, I had great friends. My parents were supportive, but I had a very difficult experience of trying to find my own space and trying to find my own way. And this continued for quite a while. I think in grade 11, it got quite bad, and I was self-harming. I still have scars. I have one on my hand, one on my wrist, a couple on my left shoulder, and that's a very interesting practice. I don't condone it now. I think it's a bad thing to do, and it's a very bad thing to continue because it does leave lasting marks. But I wouldn't say now that I wish I hadn't done it, because I think that it did give me a type of autonomy, a type of self-power that I just could not feel at the time. And so the way I see self-harm is as a means of enacting autonomy. So when everything else feels like it's out of your control, you tend to do things to yourself that nobody else can do. That's not to say that other people can't harm you or other people can't physically attack you. That's not really the point. The point is that your frustration gets so much and you have no output for the frustrations in your life. And one of the outputs that comes quite readily is pain. And pain is a very useful thing in that way, where by actually feeling something rather than just the crushing depression or nothingness that you have or that you feel you have in your life. I'll be very careful about that because there is a lot to do with the way you see others treating you. I know that I had great friends. I know that they genuinely cared about me at that time, but I could not see it in the same way. I think I also treated people quite horribly during that point because I felt like they didn't care about me, and that I needed them to step up and be compassionate and give me what I needed. And whether that's true or not, whether that was the reality, that was what my brain kept telling me. And one of the ways that I dealt with that was through self-harm. Luckily, I never had a serious suicide attempt, but some people do go there, and it's a very, very difficult thing for families and personally, uh, it's incredibly difficult to have those thoughts and still care about going to school or even studying or the creative projects you want to work on. Those things become impossible because the most important thing, as it seems to the person who is having these suicidal thoughts, is just stopping the torture you're going through every day. And that torture takes over your life. It feeds into everything. I remember one of my coping mechanisms for those feelings was gaming and reading and music. So those three things were my saving grace when it came to surviving those feelings. I just threw myself into each one of them. Music, mostly listening, because I didn't have an instrument. I had my sister's acoustic nylon string acoustic guitar, but I didn't take lessons, and I wasn't quite adept at doing anything on it at that stage. I borrowed a bass guitar from somebody at some point, and yeah, so my relationship with music was more through listening and feeling through music, and that really, really helped me. Especially bands like, and this is of course cliche, but bands like Three Doors Down, Nirvana. There's quite a few others, but I can't actually list them all right now. But quite a lot of angsty, I would say, existential content. So, talking about wanting to be alive or not wanting to be alive, and just the state of being that I was in. Having those expressions in music was fantastic because I got the chance to listen to people expressing things that I could feel but couldn't say. And I think music does that wonderfully, especially music with great poetic lyrics. Pop music nowadays is great for expressing, joy and partying and those types of things. But mostly I listen to rock, I listen to some rap, which was also really interesting compared to everything else I listened to. I also used to listen to Eminem and Tupac and these things as a teenager, which I don't now. So it's very strange that my tastes changed so much. But I think at that point, just the pure expression of everything going wrong and just trying to stay strong and those types of contents were really useful and interesting to me. In terms of gaming, I found myself very absorbed, and I mean almost to the point of, well, definitely to the point of obsession. I don't know if it ever got to the point where it was unhealthy, because I never got sick or stopped going out or seeing people because of it. But I definitely spent most of my weekends playing the Elder Scrolls series, Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, mainly because they just had this wonderful way of drawing you into the world, and you get to create your own self. And that's something I've actually spoken about with a few of my friends, that gaming is useful because it has that capacity or that potential to allow you to live a life that you can't live or that you will never live as an adventurous, charismatic, strong person. And that is a lifesaver for somebody who feels like they're nothing. To be able to sit there and achieve things in a world that just rewards you. is very good on a psychological level. I'm not claiming that that's what we should be doing whenever we feel bad, but it definitely kept me alive, and it kept me going through what I was going through without too much damage. And creating yourself as a character, and investing time and effort into yourself, creating this character, this person that then goes out into the world, and you choose their clothes, you choose their look. That's something you can't do as far as most public schools in South Africa. You can't do that because they have a dress code, they have a hair code. Pretty much everything is regulated, and you must look almost like everybody else, if not exactly like everybody else. And that was something that also, I was the type of student who had the shirt hanging out all the time. Although I did try my best to be a good student, I was definitely a suck up to teachers because they made me feel good when when I achieved. But there was just a sense that being in a game allowed me to be somebody else, and to not be ashamed of that, to also play out different lives. You could be a different race, you could be a different gender, you could be whoever you wanted to be. And that's also something so powerful that a lot of people don't understand about gaming, is that it's not only about completing the objectives and having fun, or getting the achievement. It's about expressing a type of identity that you might not have and might never have otherwise. So it's a great generative space to be in. And I think more people should be encouraged to play games like that. Along with everything else, I think there has to be a balance of playing a game and going out with your friends and getting real positive reinforcement, real world experience with people. That is definitely needed. But if you can't face that yet, one of the ways you can get some type of affirmation is from gaming. And another place I found a lot of interest, and I think this is more because of the insight it gave me into people, and who I was and who I wanted to be. And it also had the side of going on an adventure, albeit a closed adventure, was through literature. I remember saying to my friend Liam that Lord of the Rings saved my life. And I mean that almost literally, that those stories and the hope and what they call eucatastrophe, the complete reversal of tragedy, is such a powerful thing. And when reading about characters that are relatable in terms of their status. So, I mean, I'm not a hobbit, I'm not a halfling, but being able to relate to somebody who is physically small and feels worthless, and there's so much they have to do, there's such a big responsibility put on them, and yet they make it all the way to the end. That is a story I needed to hear. And of course, the fantasy elements make it really great for a teenage boy. I mean, that's undeniable. I think the movies were probably more impressive to me as a teenager, and now the books more impressive to me as an adult as I get into reading Anglo-Saxon and just learning about the cultures that Tolkien drew on to write these things. That's now a fantastic place for me to play around in and experience. But as a teenager, those worlds, Harry Potter was a huge one for me as well. Being able to go away to a place that values different magical people sounds amazing. And on some level, we all understand that, and we all want that. If you're achieving and you're doing well and you have great friends and you don't feel the need to do that, I think it's quite unlikely that you will find much joy in sitting for a couple of hours reading about a world that you don't need, in a sense. So that might be, I don't know if that's true, but that might be a way that some people get into reading books and others just don't need to, because they have everything positive in their actual real lives. Okay, literature is in your real life. I'm not saying that it's outside of your actual experience of existence, but it is something that you do alone most of the time. I spoke about this in my podcast with Nigel Backer, that we do it as a solitary activity nowadays, and that's a very individualistic, but also a very productive practice for people who have the patience and people who are able to do that. That gives you so much insight into your own life. It's introspective, so it makes you look inside. It's also just damn enjoyable, to put it lightly. Like, you pick up a book and you start reading it and you get into it. I must admit I haven't had that feeling, or hadn't had that feeling, for a very long time after my master's degree in literature, just because being forced to read as a practice, as a job, becomes very difficult, and you start to lose the sense of pure enjoyment. You start to see it as something that you just need to do to get your job done. And currently working in educational publishing, nonfiction starts to feel a little bit like that, where I'm looking through manuscripts, I'm reading, I'm editing language, and even writing content, and that becomes a very full space. And once you have fulfilled that area of your life, it becomes difficult to do more of it. And I think that speaks back to the idea of being able to read for hours on end. If you already have a very full experience of life, reading fiction probably doesn't appeal to you. And most people who love fiction probably don't have as much time spent on real... I really hate using that word, because it is real. But let's say the outside world. Let's say the physical world, rather. So people who spend a lot of time reading don't have as much regard for the physical world. They don't care as much about physical things. That's a generalization. I know that. But many of the people I've met, and many of the people I'm very good friends with, have that idea. And they know that they don't care as much about the external world as they do about their internal world, and the way they can enrich the way they see the world, rather than trying to enrich what they have in the world. So that was a very long and, I want to say, passionate detour away from what I was talking about. But hopefully that gives you a sense of how I feel about literature now that it's become such a big part of my life. Music is great, gaming is great, literature has definitely saved my life. And those things are really important for people who have mental health issues. When you want to escape from whatever is happening to you, and I must say that's my experience with my particular disorders. So I have anxiety, I have depression. Those things are very well coped with when you're by yourself, or at least from my experience, I crave solitude when I get anxious and I get depressed. Or rather, I think I crave solitude when I'm anxious, and I crave company when I'm depressed. So when I feel really bad about myself, I want to get out and I want to just forget about worrying, and I want to have a good time. But when I'm anxious, I just need the world to calm down. I also have an interesting... I only found this out probably a year or two ago, that my experience of panic attacks is not, as you might imagine, the type of rushing around, just like shaking, not being able to sit still, crying. That's not my experience of a panic attack. And I wasn't able to really figure this out until quite a long time ago. Quite a short time ago, rather. It took me a long time to figure it out, is what I mean. And my experience of a panic attack is actually sitting and staring at the wall, trying to limit the stimuli in my environment, trying to just block everything out because it's too much for me. I can't focus. I can't listen to people without like thinking inside my head, I can't just stop talking, stop talking, stop talking. And it's not about them. It's not about the fact that I don't want to talk to them or don't want to hear them. It's just I am not able to take in that much when I'm feeling anxious. And I do worry that that's put some people off me or that I've upset some people that way. But at the end of the day, if that's the way you're having a panic attack, you cannot help that, and that's not your fault. Um, I think I have to remind myself constantly, like, I don't have to apologize all the time. I don't have to say, I'm so sorry that I left this for 5 minutes and didn't reply to you. I'm constantly leaving messages for 1 or 2 days because I just either don't have the time or don't have the calm space to respond to people. And that makes me very anxious, but I'm trying my best not to let it bother me. Um, so that I think I've explained my experience with depression quite fully, but my experience with anxiety is quite different. My experience with anxiety, I think, began a lot later. So I had depression or depressive episodes, shall we call them. I don't think I was chronically depressed until I started postgrad. Then pressure and just the need for my own space became massively, massively impactful on my life. But with anxiety, I think it only really, really started to hit me when I started teaching. And I started tutoring first years in 2015. I did 1 year of teaching. And my first class that I taught were wonderful people. Like, I had such a great time. But at the same time, I was battling feelings of what they call the imposter complex. So walking into the room, feeling like nobody wants you there and nobody's going to listen to you, except everybody was listening and they wanted to interact. And in first year, I think people are just so wonderfully excited about what they're doing. University is new, university is wonderful, but I didn't feel capable. And I was in my master's, so my first year of master's doing coursework. No, I lied. It was in my second year of master's. So I'd already finished all my coursework and I was doing tutoring and research. So I was reading, going to the library, typing up my results for my thesis, and I was tutoring at the same time. So I had a fair amount of time on my hands to prepare and everything, and I was prepared when I went into classes most of the time. I must say there were a few times that I actually wasn't prepared, but that those moments were actually less anxiety provoking than when I'd prepared, ironically. But I think I don't know exactly how or where it became the worst that it got. But I remember, I think it was my second or third week teaching, and I was on the train on the way, and I just had one of those panic attacks where I just could not deal. I felt very claustrophobic, and I'm not claustrophobic. I felt it like I was having difficulty breathing, my stomach was hurting. I felt this really physical reaction to anxiety, and I still have that. That started then, and I still have that, where I get this lump in my throat. I actually think what happens is my body starts tensing so much that when I breathe in, I'm actually taking air into my esophagus and into my stomach, and I get very uncomfortable. That's why I get the stomach aches. That's why I feel the lump in my throat. It's actually stuck in my esophagus. And it just, yeah, it's a horrible, horrible experience. And I think that was just during that period, I had so much I was thinking about. I was at that stage where I really needed to move out of home to get my own space and start doing my own thing. Even this podcast is sort of a testament to how far I've been able to come with that sort of progress. I needed to get my own space. I needed to finish my master's, which was pending. I eventually took I think it was an extra 4 months. So I took 2 years and 4 months to finish it, which is not unusual. It just felt that I had missed my own mark. And I think that might be a good point to talk about how much we create our own anxiety on an on an unconscious level. And we create our anxiety on an unconscious level by pressuring ourselves to meet these standards that we have. And I don't know where they come from. They could come from our parents, they could come from our teachers, they could come from our friends, or they could just be something that we really, really, really want to achieve. And I think it was all of the above for me. I know my parents wanted me to do well. I know, like, my first thought when I started in first year was like, man, I'm going to be a literature professor. I'm going to be just like Tolkien. I kind of obsessed about it. I always talked about it. I started to write fiction while I was busy learning about Shakespeare, and I really felt like, oh, this is where I'm going to go. And I was not so much delusional as just unrealistic with how much I could take on and how much I could try and achieve during that time. I needed to do my coursework. I needed to think about career. I needed to think about how do I make the money to get out of home. And I didn't, and I couldn't, because those dreams were just too, I suppose, too important for my identity and my ego. I needed to think that that's where I was going, otherwise I wouldn't follow through with it. And that's what I had to confront in my last few months of masters, was actually saying, okay, I've got a problem. I'm not able to get up in the mornings. I feel terrible about my work. I feel terrible about myself. I need to make some sort of adjustment. And I remember saying, I don't remember who I ended up saying it to, my mom or my dad, but I remember saying, I need to go to the doctor. I think I'm depressed. And it wasn't an easy conversation. I don't think these things ever are, because you don't want to hear that someone's not okay. And I think it's difficult to be on both sides. It's difficult to say it out loud. It's difficult to say anything that you're really self-conscious about or really struggling with out loud. But to say it to somebody who then has to, in a way, verify it and say, oh, all right, okay, I'm going to take you to the doctor, is a bit terrifying, because, for one, what if they don't believe you? What if they say, don't be silly, you're not depressed? That could be very negative. That could be something you really don't need to hear, and it could push you in the opposite direction. Just as a side note, anybody who is experiencing those types of symptoms and really can't face asking for help or telling somebody that they need help, as uncomfortable as it is, you have to do it. It is the first point that you have to get right. You just have to admit it first to yourself. You're not coping. You're not going to be able to pull yourself out of this. You need help. And you can ask for help from different people. It doesn't have to be the people you rely on all the time. You might feel like, well, I already burden my friends with so many things. Find somebody who genuinely does care and will make the effort to take you there or to go with you. Luckily, there wasn't too much of a negative response. I think there was a lot of confusion. But by that stage, my parents could see I was not doing okay. I've been sleeping in until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, sometimes staying up until 4 in the morning, stressing. I gained a lot of weight from stress eating. It just wasn't a pretty time. It was very obvious to anyone who lived with me that that's what was going on. So it wasn't surprising to them. It was just something that they had to, I suppose, feel the reality of, as I did. And being medicated, so what happened was, going to the doctor, I had a very brief chat with him. I explained what my situation was, and he said, I'm on your side, I'm on your team, I want to see you doing better. I want to help you, and I think the best way is to start you on a short course of antidepressants. Now that was a year and a half ago, and I'm still on them, but I know that without them, I would probably not be working the job I am right now, living outside of home, recording these podcasts that I'm doing with friends, taking photographs, going out. I would still be stuck in my room, and I would still be hating myself for it. So, just as a testament to seeking help, I've also been in therapy for around a year and a half, and that's been really, really helpful. Psychotherapy is great if that's the way that you need to reflect on your problems. So I can't recommend looking for help enough. But yeah, that's my experience so far. I'm still having little bumps here and there. I've missed a day of medication sometimes, and that really sucks. That's just about the worst feeling, because I think it may even make you feel worse than you used to feel. Just dipping below that new normal that your body has set with the medication, feels terrible. It feels like the world's falling apart. It's not a nice place to be. But other than that, it's really night and day. Once the medication started to kick in, it took about 2 and a bit weeks. I remember waking up and thinking to myself, is this what it feels like to be normal? Is this really what people feel every day? I felt almost manic, sort of, oh my God, how can life feel so good? This doesn't feel right. And at the same time, I was speaking to a friend of mine at work about this. At the same time, you feel robbed. To know that you haven't felt like this for, at least for myself, for years of your life. You have not felt happy. And it's not so much even happy. You haven't felt just normal, just plain alive and there. And when you wake up and you are adjusted and you get up at 7:30 or 7 or 6, whenever you get up, as normal people do. Nowadays, I'm awake at sort of 6:45, up by 7:30, and that's a massive difference. Everything feels so much more than it used to. So that's a very long and personal and intense journey that I've described to you. Obviously, there's a lot more in it. There's a huge amount of detail that I've left out simply because that's not what I intend with this talk. I just want to give my friends and anyone else who's listening a sense of what it's like to go through that and come out on the other side. I'm still at the very, very beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel. I haven't made it through everything, but I at least know that I have a stable way to deal with what I'm going through. And I might decide to do a talk on some of the methods that really help to manage anxiety and to manage depression, though I'm no expert in them myself. I think it would be really great to offer that to people who I know and to people that might want to hear it. So thank you for listening, and I hope that this helps you in some way, either to understand me or to understand yourself and to take that step to making a difference in your life that really, really means something. Because it's not easy and it is worth it. That's about as much as I can say.